The moon landings were, of course, fake. Or were they? I guess it just depends on who you ask. So I'm going to break down quickly the reasons why people say the moon landings were faked, and then I'm going to tell you NASA's responses to those accusations. But first, a special shout out to YouTuber Behind the Signs 5165 for suggesting today's video. Hey, leave me a comment and tell me what topic I should do a video on next. All right. People think the moon landing was fake due to various conspiracy theories, and here are just some of them. Let's look at the theories first. Number one, photographic anomalies. There's claims of inconsistent shadows and lighting in photos and videos. Number two is flag waving. The appearance of the American flag waving in a vacuum? How was that possible? No stars visible. The absence of stars in the moon sky in all of these photographs. How about radiation concerns? Doubts that astronauts could survive the Van Allen radiation belts. That's a lot of radiation. Studio allegations. Belief that the landings were staged on Earth, possibly directed by Stanley Kubrick. Technical skepticism. Doubts about 1960s technology being advanced enough to really pull this off. Motivation theory, suspicions that the U.S. faked the landings just to win the space race against the Soviet Union. Astronaut behavior, odd behaviors of astronauts during interviews when they returned and interpreted as signs of guilt or secrecy. How about rover tracks? Claims that the lunar rover's tracks appeared inconsistent. Then you have third-party verification. They say there's lack of independent verification from non-NASA sources at the time. Nothing to verify everything. Then there's claims of missing data. Missing original telemetry data and high-resolution video recordings. The evidence. Photographic clarity is one. Images from the moon being just too clear and too well composed. And horizon anomalies, claims of the anomalies in the lunar horizon in photographs. And then there's rocket limitations, beliefs that the Saturn V rocket couldn't have carried out the mission, just not powerful enough. Audio delays, inconsistencies in the expected communication delays. Should have been greater. The Nixon phone call from the Oval Office, there's just no way the technology existed to allow a phone call all the way to the moon. Then they say surface dust, the lack of significant crater beneath the lunar module from its landing when those rockets fired off. You have historical distrust, general distrust in government and skepticism about official narratives. Then you have technical errors, perceived technical errors and inconsistencies in NASA's documentation. Then you have cultural reinforcement. That's the influence of media and popular culture reinforcing these conspiracy beliefs. You have also internet proliferation, the spread and amplification of these theories through the internet and, of course, all over social media. So these reasons are collectively and they contribute to the persistence of moon landing conspiracy theories. Now, here are NASA's responses to these common claims suggesting that the moon landing was fake. Number one is the photographic anomalies. Now, NASA explains that the unusual shadows and the lighting are due to the uneven surface of the moon and the different angles of the light source, of course being the sun. The lack of atmosphere on the moon also affects how light behaves. Number two is the flag waving. The flag appears to wave because it was designed with a horizontal rod to hold it out. Now, movement occurred when the astronauts were planning it, and the lack of atmosphere meant there was really no air resistance to stop it immediately or even really slow it down. Then they say no stars visible. Stars are not visible in the photographs because the camera settings were adjusted for the bright lunar surface and astronaut suits, causing the relatively dim stars to be undetectable. Radiation concerns. NASA states that the Apollo missions were carefully planned to minimize radiation exposure. The spacecraft traveled quickly through the Van Allen belts, and that the astronauts received what they consider to be a safe dose of radiation. And then there's the studio allegations. NASA dismisses the studio allegations by pointing out the enormous logistical challenges and the many independent tracking stations worldwide that monitored the missions. Technical skepticism. NASA asserts that the technology of the 1960s, while primitive by today's standards, were adequate for the mission, supported by extensive research, testing, and development. Then we talk about motive theories. NASA refutes these by emphasizing the scientific and engineering achievements of the missions, which involve tens of thousands of people across many different organizations. Astronaut behavior. NASA attributes any perceived odd behaviors to stress and fatigue of the mission and subsequent media engagements, not to guilt or any type of secrecy. Rover tracks. NASA explains that the rover tracks are consistent with the moon's low gravity and the lack of atmospheric conditions affecting the soil. The third-party verifications. NASA highlights the independent tracking and telemetry data collected by countries such as the Soviet Union, who were monitoring the missions as they were happening. Missing data. NASA acknowledges some original data is missing, but emphasizes that multiple copies of the data and independent verifications do exist. Photographic clarity. NASA points out that the astronauts were trained in photography and the equipment was designed to function well in the lunar environment to give them the best possible pictures. Horizon anomalies. NASA explains that the moon's curvature and the camera lenses used can create visual effects that may seem unusual but are scientifically explainable. The rocket limitations. NASA provides detailed technical documentation showing the Saturn V rocket's capabilities and successful launches. All of those, they say, are documented. Audio delays. NASA states that the communication delays were consistent with the expected time it takes for signals to travel between the Earth and the moon. They say that those were expected. The Nixon phone call. NASA says the call went from the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. to Houston, then to space via mission control through the capsule communicator. This is all according to AT&T. From Houston, the call bounced to manned space flight network dish antennas, it's a mouthful, around the world, traveled about 238,000 miles to the Apollo lunar module, and then finally reached antennas on Armstrong and Aldrin's backpacks. The call, they said, used technology that was developed by the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Geological Survey, and several contractors, including Bellcom, a Bell System subsidiary, formed at NASA's request in 1952. Employing Bell Lab scientists, the General Dynamics Corp developed an S-band transponder for communications between Apollo 11 and Mission Control, all designed to withstand extreme conditions. Hundreds of employees in Scottsdale, Arizona began developing it in 1962. Surface dust. Now, NASA clarifies that the lunar module was designed to land softly, dispensing the dust rather than creating a large crater. Now, historical distrust. NASA emphasizes the transparency and the extensive documentation of the Apollo missions, including inviting skeptics to review the data and all of the evidence. Now, technical errors. NASA acknowledges minor technical issues, but points out that they were documented and resolved, not indicative of any fakery. Cultural reinforcements. All right, so NASA combats misinformation through educational programs and providing access to mission archives and all of the resources. The internet proliferation. Well, NASA engages with the public on social media and other platforms to address and debunk the myths, providing accurate information and, again, evidence to the missions. NASA responses aim to clarify misunderstandings and provide evidence based on explanations for each claim. So what do you believe? Did we land on the moon as the greatest achievement in human history? Or was it all a hoax? to force the Soviet Union into spending all of their money they didn't have so that they could get ahead in a space race that really wasn't happening. Leave me a comment and let me know.